Or if you got sick, you're healed, like yours truly. Welcome to this month's episode of one of the hottest new pods, not only here on the PTB Wrestling Network, but all over, Through the Looking Glass, where we go back through time and find a moment, a match, a feud, a promo, a real-life event, and turn it around a little bit and go through an alternate universe and see what would have happened if something else took place, or if something didn't happen. How would history have changed? So it's January, so I think you kind of have an idea what we're talking about this month. As I hinted in December, we are talking Sold Out. So no, I'm just kidding. Let me bring in before I stop babbling, the gentleman chuckling as well. Let's want to stop my yapping. I want to say Happy New Year to one of my favorite people. One of my favorite people I do a pod with, and one of my favorite people in general. He is the Thunder from Down Under, and he actually started 2022 before I did. Happy New Year, Mr. Dave Hall.
Happy New Year to you, Scott. Happy New Year to everyone out there in the Place to Be Nation. It is a lovely, warm, hot summer's day down here in Australia. And but it's been great, and I hope everyone has had a happy and safe holiday wherever you're listening around the world, because I know it's not just the US. We've got listeners in the UK and down here in Australia and all over. So happy New Year to everyone. I hope it was a great Christmas. I had the opportunity finally down here in Australia. A lot of the state borders, all the COVID restrictions starting to be dropped, and we were able to go on a holiday to visit family and friends in other parts of our own country. And thankfully I did, because we left our home base, and within 2 days of going on holiday, all our friends got COVID. So we managed to avoid that and then come back after they were all recovered. So I seem to be just avoiding this little plague everywhere I go. But unfortunately, Scott, not quite so successful for you.
No, Dave. As everyone knows, I announced it on the main event a couple weeks ago. I did get COVID over New Year's, and you could kind of still hear it in myself. I'm fine. I'm negative, and I'm out of it. It's been, as we're recording now, it's been 16 days, so I'm pretty good. But 16 days since I first got it, and 11 days, I guess. Well, it's about 8 days since my fifth. Well, that whole mishmash of equations of days and such. Anyway, I'm great, but New Year's was not fun. But what's better is, as we all know, everybody, Australia is on the other side of the world. Dave's going to experience this in July, while we are experiencing what he's experiencing right now. When I woke up this morning on this, we're breaking the fourth wall. We are recording on Saturday. When I woke up this morning here in lovely Norwalk, Connecticut, you want to know what the temperature was, Dave?
I have no idea, but I'm sure it was colder than here.
It was 9 when I woke up this morning. 9. Not 99 like you. 9. It peaked at a balmy 21 at one point. But when I got out of the car this evening to come up from visiting family and getting ready for our recording, it went back down to 10. It is supposed to break tomorrow, Sunday, and get a little warmer, like the 40s. But of course, we're supposed to get a nor'easter. But for us, it looks like it's mostly rain. But anyway, I'm glad
we don't even get that low in winter ever. Let alone just on that. It might get up to the 40s. We're lucky if it gets to the 40s overnight in winter.
I would kill for the lowest ever in Norwalk in the Northeast to be in the 40s. Believe me. A lot of times it's 4. But in any event, Dave, I'm glad you're well. I'm glad you didn't get the vid, and I pray for you and everyone who has not gotten COVID that you don't. And I mentioned it quickly before we move on to the fun stuff, because who wants to talk about stuffy noses and coughing? But for me, and I said this, I've said this to people who had COVID in the beginning when you had to quarantine for 2 weeks. Being isolated, like I live alone, a committed bachelor, and I'm good with that. When you're sitting here on your couch I mean, at least I could walk around freely in my place. I know married men, my friends who are married, who their wives lock them in the bedroom for 5 days because they're the only ones that got it. Whereas me, I can walk freely. But after a while, when you're sitting and staring at your TV, there's only so much wrestling you can deal with, movies. Like, you literally want to pick up your TV and throw it out the window. Like, you're done. So I actually did a decent amount of reading and music listening during my medical exile. So that was nice. But anyway, enough of that. I'm glad you're well, Dave, and you didn't get it. Pray for your friends, I hope, and family. I hope they all recovered easily, and as did I. And a lot of us at Place to Be Nation got it. So, but at this point, I think everyone's going to eventually get it, and then we're good. I think I have that feeling. I'm always been an eternal optimist. So
yeah, most likely. That's I think that's the general perception these days.
Exactly. So. Anyway, let's talk wrestling because that's what we do here. We don't talk about.
That's right.
We don't talk about colds and viruses because we don't know shit about that. But we do know wrestling, and I got to tell you, Dave, I've gotten a ton of great comments from a lot of people about the show and our first 3 episodes. We had a ton of fun doing them, and we thank you very much. And we think you're going to like tonight's show because we're talking about one of everyone's favorite match gimmicks of all time. I think you know what we're going to talk about since it is January. But for those that haven't listened to the back catalog yet, keep listening to this episode. It's not in continuity. But when you finish listening to this, go back to our catalog. Our first episode, we talked CM Punk 2011. Our second episode, we talked Montreal if it didn't happen. And in December, we talked about rebooking Goldberg's streak. And that was a fun episode because I don't talk about that a lot. So I had a blast with that episode, and we got a lot of nice pub from it. So, but tonight, again, no, all kidding aside, no sold out. We all know what we're talking about tonight. Dave, why don't you set the table for us?
Well, January is always a special month because it's the month when we all reach into the little lotto box, we draw out a number, and we hope that our number is going to allow us a good spot in the Royal Rumble itself. 30 men, no friends, lots of winners, but maybe there's some changes afoot. We're looking at the Royal Rumble tonight. We're going to have a look at some. We're going to stray a little bit from some previous approaches. We're actually going to look at several Royal Rumbles. We're going to look at what might have happened in the WWE if someone different won some particular Royal Rumbles, and I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation today.
I agree. Because the way our show is, we don't just talk about Rumbles. We're going to go back and we're going to have some fun with past Royal Rumbles. We're going to talk about Rumbles that went well. But mostly tonight, we're going to talk about 2 things. We're going to talk about Rumble missteps. Maybe a Rumble winner that you probably scratched your head and went, And then we are going to go through the looking glass and maybe fix some Rumbles that in hindsight, the WWE probably would have avoided knowing what they would have known years later. And Dave and I will come up with some alternative choices for Rumble winners in years where if something hadn't happened or something had happened, the Rumble winner that did happen in real life would probably not have, if that makes any sense.
I'm sure it'll make sense once we get through.
Yeah, exactly. I did a lot of yeses and nos in that synopsis. So, usually ask me first, Dave, so I'll ask you first. What is your earliest memory of the Royal Rumble?
So as I've shared down here in Australia, we relied a lot on the video rentals and hitting the rental stores. So I didn't see the 88 Rumble because that was never released on VHS, so at least not down here in Australia. You know what?
You're right. It wasn't. Good call, Dave. It was never released. My copy. My copy's on like a dub, the one that I own.
I
So,
never saw the '88 Rumble until the Royal Rumble anthology DVDs were released. So that was the first time I saw it. But the 1989 Royal Rumble, that was, I was in the peak of my growing fandom at that time. It came out, I rented it, I sat down, I watched it again, I rented it again, and it is probably one of the most watched videos I ever had. So my first taste of the Royal Rumble was the 1989 Royal Rumble, and I was sold right from the beginning. I loved it. I always loved the concept. I thought it was a fun event. I think the 30 or 29 enemies, no friends concept. I always loved the idea of who was going to face. And I think for me, that big thing, that 1989 Rumble, what sold me was the fact that my favorite tag team went head to head, numbers 1, number 2, Axe and Smash. It laid the platform for the future of the Rumble. And I know the '88 Rumble existed and happened, and it was more of a typical, good guys and bad guys worked together, and you sort of had typical battle royal style event. When Axe and Smash went head to head and actually fought in the ring, I was sold. This event was great. And then when Andre came in and they just stopped and went after him, yeah, it's some great memories. I loved watching that '89 Rumble.
well, my first Royal Rumble was actually the '88 Rumble. I was 14, and I was sitting in my living room watching it live on USA Network. Meanwhile, Dave, upstairs in the second floor of my house, my brother actually bought, because for those that some of the younger fans that may not know this, on that same night, Jim Crockett Promotions held their Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view.
Oh dear!
From fittingly for some weird reason, the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale, which is about 45 minutes from where I am right now. And they were trying to encroach into, because at the time WWF and JCP were having a little battle, and Vince, obviously, it all goes back to the previous November when WWF encroached on Starrcade '87 by having their first Survivor Series, and now, with their pay-per-view, Bunkhouse Stampede, the WWF decides to do a free show on that Sunday night on USA Network, and it was the Royal Rumble. Now, of course, as everyone remembers, the hook for that show was not the match. The match nobody really gave a shit about. This was all about the contract signing for the big rematch between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant to take place on February 5th at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, and it was going to be on Friday night on NBC, the first time pro wrestling was going to be on primetime television. And I was on cloud nine, Dave. I was super pumped. I was so in on this. I remember a great Rick Rude, Ricky Steamboat match on that show. And then the Rumble. Now, let me give you a little backstory for me again. I was never, and I'm curious your thoughts, Dave. I was never the biggest Battle Royal fan. That was not one of my favorite match gimmicks. To that point in my fandom, the only real Battle Royal that I really watched with a lot of enthusiasm was the one at WrestleMania 2 in Chicago with, won by Andre the Giant. Before that, any Battle Royals I watched were on, the best of the WWF volume, whatever, and all those old Battle Royals at the Garden in the 70s and early 80s, or the Spectrum or Boston Garden, or maybe a random European one or something, or maybe one from Melbourne or something. God only knows. They like doing that kind of stuff at big shows in, outside the U.S. But to me, it was always just like a bunch of clumsy oafs, farting around until somebody fell out of the ring. The Battle Royal at WrestleMania 2 was fun because you had like football players, and for a 12-year-old kid like me, I'm like, wow, this is really cool, But for the most part, a Battle Royal was never one of my favorite match gimmicks. So getting back to that night, January 24th, 1988, in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'm watching this match, and I'm like, this is different. Like, this isn't just a bunch of guys loafing around the ring waiting for somebody to fall out. You actually have to do something to get these guys out of the ring, because you're not going to get any help, because you might be alone for a while. There might only be up to 5 guys, and then guys get eliminated. So the concept, rest in peace, Pat Patterson, you fucking genius, was amazing. But at the time, of course, Dave, the match itself, the importance was not there. It was just a throwaway match, because it was all about the contract signing between Hogan and Andre. And then as fast forward a year, and I thought to myself, and I don't think I remember saying this. I think my brother did. He goes, that eventually, that probably next year Vince is going to make, well, you can say Vince because we didn't know he was the boss. Eventually they're going to make this a pay-per-view. And you're like, yeah, you're probably right. And sure enough, like you said, Dave, January 89 from the summit in Houston, Texas, we had the 89 Rumble. And of course, now what's funny about that show is the Mega Powers thing was a big deal, but I remember more Rick Rude attacking the Ultimate Warrior and hitting him with the bulwark and choking him out, and that because I loved that feud in 1989. Loved that feud. And that match at SummerSlam, the WrestleMania match is good, but the match at SummerSlam is one of my favorite matches of all time. It's very high on my GWWE list. So similar to you, Dave, I was a Rumble fan from the beginning.
Yeah, the 89. I just think that there was something about even the early stages of the Rumble, like you said, they had to work. The fact that they were starting with so few people meant you couldn't just lean up against the ropes and try and push someone out, or wait a couple of minutes and wait for something to happen. They had to work from the beginning, and so the action was always pretty constant. And I know there are times that Rumbles they end up with too many people in the ring, and it does just look like an old school battle royal. But for the most part, they set that standard very early, that it became a working event. It wasn't a night off. It wasn't a stand around, just wait, bide your time. I mean, the famous story, you talk about battle royals and people doing nothing. I mean, the famous story is, of course, the 1989 AWA held a Royal Rumble to crown their world champion, and Larry Zbyszko wins the match. And I just remember reading in the PWIs and all that how he just talked on about how he just sat around and did nothing for the whole match until the very end, because you could do that. You could do that in battle royals. But the Royal Rumble was different, and the excitement of who was coming in next, and was it going to be an ally? Was it going to be an enemy? Was it going to be that blood feud that was going to just ramp up and cause all sorts of added drama? That's what made the Royal Rumble such a special event, and something that has continued through the years. The Rumble just has that special place in the calendar, and I think in a lot of fans' hearts, that it doesn't matter what's going on in the company. It never mattered what was happening. The Rumble match, it was almost like it could reset. Everything could be going bad for 6 months, but the Rumble could reset everything. Everything could be sort of a bit unsteady, and the Rumble could reset. It could rebuild a career. It could rebuild a storyline. It could rebuild interest. And as you said, the early ones, they didn't have any real stakes. And then, of course, 92, the world title's on the line, in 93, it became the winner gets the title shot, and the stakes were brought in and amped it up even more. Who's going to win? Who's going to go to WrestleMania? What are we going to see? And that interest is just, it just carries the feel. And so that January event every year was always something that I looked forward to. I couldn't wait, no matter how jaded I might feel, the Royal Rumble was always that reboot point.
You're exactly right. And, because they always said it's WrestleMania season, which a lot of people feels starts at Survivor Series, which maybe it does, depending on your point of view and depending on what the feud is. And then you kind of have the throwaway pay-per-view in December. And then when we hit the Rumble, then we're getting ready for WrestleMania season. So a lot of people know my favorite Rumble. Well, I have a lot of favorite Rumbles, of course, 2002. Duh. Um, duh. Um, 2016, only because he threw out like one of my least favorite guys ever. But nah. Besides those, of course, those don't count. Uh, Obviously 1992. Who doesn't love
Yeah,
that one?
that's I think that's a no-brainer for any long-term fan of wrestling. I think always looks at the 92 Rumble with great appreciation.
It has to. It was the first one that had, as you had just mentioned, it was the first one that had a hook to it. It wasn't just some thing, because we all know what happened in November and December with Hogan and Taker. So the Winged Eagle was on the line. So it wasn't just that. It was because of that, you had one of the most loaded Rumbles ever. Like everybody was in it. I remember thinking actually Piper was going to win because all they talked about, Bobby and Gorilla, that whole show, was Piper trying to be, Roddy Two Belts by the end of the night because, as you know, earlier in the night, he beat the Mountie and became the Intercontinental Champion. So everybody, I was thinking a little Roddy Two Belts was happening by the end of the night because they just kept talking about it. And I'm thinking, you never know. But, of course, Slick Rick won. 97 was a fun Rumble because that was kind of a weird, jaded mess. But for 1997, that was kind of par for the course, but that made it entertaining. God, let me think. I was live for 2015 at the Wells Fargo Arena in Philly, and that was, of course, one of the more infamous Rumble endings ever. I was ready to get out of there before I got hit with something, whether it was a bottle or a battery or used diaper or something. God only knows. And then 3 years later, in 2018, I was in Philly live, and that was the first year we had Women's Rumble, and we had the Far East flavor because we had both Knock and we had Asuka winning the two Rumbles, and of course I got to see the debut of Ronda, who came out at the end of that, and the place went batshit for that. What about you, Dave? What are some of your favorite Rumble moments?
I think, as you said, the '92 Rumble is just up there. I've always had a soft spot for the 2001 Rumble. I really enjoyed that one. The time, and I guess it's like everything. Things tie in with like you was just sharing. You got to go to these ones, and they end up having a special place for me. Things that were going on in my life in 2001, I ended up doing an unplanned trip. I was really struggling with some stuff and went and visited some family. And actually, my uncle who got me into wrestling in the first place, I went and visited him, and we watched the '01 Rumble together and live. And that was on pay-per-view, and that was a really great experience. And that I've always enjoyed that Rumble. I love looking back at that one and all the heavyweights in there at the end, and Kane's, we get that Kane performance. We talk about originally it was the Diesel push, and sort of now it's sort of the Kane Diesel push. You get that sort of the dominant person who does that run. So that '01 Rumble sits nicely for me as one of my preferred ones, and as crazy as it seems, I do have a little bit of a soft spot for the '05 Rumble and that little crazy ending with Batista and Cena. I always and Vince coming out and tearing his quads and sitting on his ass in the middle of the ring.
How ridiculous!
I've always loved that. They talk. I've heard the podcast series that Jimmy Corderas used to do. And talking about it, he was one of the referees out there and how it was unplanned. And I don't know whether I've ever been convinced or not that if it was a shoot, if it was accidental, it was the flukiest accident you've ever had. But there was enough chaos to make you think that it wasn't planned. So I just always loved the ending of that and sort of the Batista push that came out of that. I was a big fan of where they were taking that storyline. So those are some of the ones that really stand out to me.
Yeah, I like that 2001 show because obviously that Rumble I love, Austin winning, but also one of my favorite undercard matches of all time, which was Jericho and Benoit, the ladder match for the IC belt. And that's, I would say starting in 90. probably 95 is when we started getting some high-class undercard matches, because 95, of course, would have the first of what would be a pretty good series of matches between Bret Hart and Diesel. That 95 Rumble match gets shit on because of the 6,000 run-ins at the end. But that match is pretty good. Not as good as our Survivor Series match. That's their best. But that Rumble match gets crapped on a lot because the run-ins just wreck it. But up to that point, I thought Diesel and Bret had good chemistry. I really do. You've got and then of course you got the infamous Rock Mankind I Quit in '99, where obviously Rock beats the crap out of Mick with the chair, gasses his head open.
Brutal. That was brutal. Yeah. That one,
and no apologies. Yeah, watch Beyond the Mat for that.
The 2000 match between Triple H and Cactus Jack is that's not just an all-time Rumble match or for just a Rumble card. That's an all-time classic, and I know you as a Triple H fan obviously would hold in high regard, but I think everyone will give credit where it's due, and that match is just, it's one of the all-time greats.
It absolutely is. I agree with you 100%. And I love the 02 Rumble. That Rock Jericho match is very unheralded. And that Rumble is great. And for me, and I'm not just saying that because Triple H won. I'm saying it because that Rumble is loaded. Another loaded Rumble. And then the last four guys is Triple H, Kurt, Steve Austin, and Mr. Perfect.
That was to me, that was the awesome moment. Mr. Perfect coming out and being there at the end and giving glimpses of the old Mr. Perfect, and that was absolutely. that was a moment, and it's a shame they didn't really do more with him. Unfortunately, he passed away. Probably not too much longer after that.
About a year later,
yeah,
he passed away. He was in TNA, where we've been talking about it on Main Event. So, I mean, we could talk all night just about simple moments, but what we're going to do here, we all know the basis of the show. Before we do some rebooking, let's go back and talk about missteps, because not every Rumble's perfect, unfortunately. And whether how the misstep impacted the company or the wrestler's direction. Now, if you look back, a lot of the ones in the 90s were kind of predetermined. Obviously, the ones that didn't involve any reward, 88 through 91, really don't count. Although many could argue. Let's talk about this for a minute. Obviously, Hulk Hogan won back-to-back Rumbles in 1990 and 1991. The 91 Rumble was one thing because they were starting that wave with Slaughter as champion earlier in the night. Of course, he beat Warrior to win the world title. So Hogan winning made sense because he was, the whole All-American, and that was Real American, and that was the build to WrestleMania 7. But you could argue, Dave, that he was already the world champion in 1990 at that point. Did he really have to win that Rumble in 1990? I've talked about it on the Place Be podcast. JR and I have talked about it. We've talked about it on many other shows. Did Hulk Hogan really have to win in 1990?
We could do an entire podcast episode of this show on this Rumble outcome and maybe what happened afterwards. I don't think he needed. I think it was unnecessary. I don't think Hogan needed to win that match. I think they showed in '89 that the top two guys can be eliminated before the end and it still work. They had their moment where Hogan and Warrior clashed in '90. They had that moment, and they could just as easily had them both go out at some point. Hogan didn't need to win that. I am a firm believer. I'm in the camp that I really believe Mr. Perfect should have won that match. I think it would have been the perfect outcome for him. Pun certainly intended.
I see what you did.
But but his whole character was built on that unbeaten streak, and to be able to come out of the Rumble with, I'm the perfect, wrestler. I've won the Rumble. I think it would have just taken him to a whole nother level. And unfortunately, we can, as I said, we could do a whole podcast episode on Mr. Perfect in 1990, and maybe we will in the future. Who knows? But I really believe that it was the first step in derailing all the work they had done for over 12 months with Mr. Perfect, and within 3 months they had completely stuffed up that push in that direction, and Perfect could have been a challenger for Warrior down the track, and if a Rumble win would have carried that, a Rumble win maybe would have given more impact to matches between him and Hogan on Saturday night's main event. It would have carried a lot to be able, because you can win a Rumble through completely fluky measures. I mean, Hogan could run it perfect. He could just drop down, pull the rope down, and Hogan goes over the top. One of those little fluky things. He doesn't need to overpower him or out wrestle him to do it. You can win the Rumble on a fluke, and they could just have easily done that. Hogan could have come back in, thrown Perfect out, posed, and everyone still would have gone home happy. So no, I agree. Hogan did not need that win.
And it does, and I think it does impact the future, because you had Perfect, who did end up winning the Intercontinental title, because obviously when Warrior won at WrestleMania 6, the IC belt was vacated. So I get that. But what I think hurt is that Hogan vanquished all of these heels. So Hogan leaves, and Warrior's left with nobody to wrestle. So they have to rehash the Rick Rude feud, which by that point was broken down and done. And then they have a match. They're supposed to have this cage match at SummerSlam 90. Meanwhile, they end up facing each other at a Science main event before that.
Main event. I've just been working
through.
I've actually been working through. I've been watching 1990 in sort of television order. I've been watching Superstars. I've got Superstars. Beautiful. I've got every episode of Superstars from sort of 1986 to 1990. And I've been working my way through and watching the Saturday night main events when they happen, and watching the pay-per-views when they happen. I'm actually up to SummerSlam right now, but I've been watching this whole journey, and that's exactly it. Hogan has vanquished everyone, and Warrior he wins the title at WrestleMania, and they have nothing to push him into and to propel him towards. There's no one that you're sitting there. The only potential challenger is the man that they send in line to Hogan in the form of Earthquake. He's the only person who had any legitimacy left, because they had sacrificed Mr. Perfect to Brutus Beefcake. And that was a mistake in itself. So yeah, they really didn't. And it's very evident. And I can talk a lot more. There's been a lot more missteps of the Ultimate Warrior. Maybe that's a one for down the track as well. But yeah, they really. It's just the whole TV. It's all around Hogan, and there's no one gunning for Warrior.
Yeah, and it led to a lukewarm title run in 90. By the end of the year, he's in 6-man tags with their Legion of Doom against Demolition. He's doing that more than he's defending the belt, and then by January, he's cooked and wins.
I'll throw you out. I mean, to even pre-case, as I said, I'm up to SummerSlam, but the Superstars event, the WWF Superstars show, the week before, or the last one before SummerSlam, they started hyping the 6-man Demolition versus Legion of Doom Ultimate Warrior matches on the house show circuit. They started hyping them the episode before SummerSlam was due to occur. So they were. It wasn't just a late in the year thing. They were telecasting that from before SummerSlam.
Which is just ridiculous. Right? It just makes no sense. So weird. Looking ahead to some of the other ones, I mean, 90, 93, Yoko. We'll get to some of those other ones. 94. Was 94 a misstep? And we could talk about this when we get to our next segment. did the whole Brett Luger tie thing do anything for anybody? I mean, I know they were trying to gauge who should be in the main event at WrestleMania 10 to face Yoko for the title. Brett was the fans' choice. Luger was Vince's choice. But Luger just couldn't get the job done. And, then he opened his big fucking mouth apparently and told everybody he was going to win. And then, with typical Luger stupidity.
I think the only person who really again, it's one of those things. Did it need to happen? It certainly was different when it happened. It was something that had never been done. It was unique, and I think at the time it holds that. Wow, I didn't expect that, and I never thought they would do something like that. So I think at the time, it had that unique element. I think post Royal Rumble, it became very evident that the direction was going to Brett, and ironically, I think the only person who really benefited from it was Owen, because it allowed them to jumpstart what they did with Owen Hart for the year. So, did they need to do it? Probably not. Is it a misstep? I'm not sure I'd classify it as a misstep, although I do think everyone wanted Brett to win. And by having Brett do the knee injury angle in the tag match, they really, classic WWF booking stories would be, well, Brett should be the winner because he's going in hurt now and he needs to overcome the odds. And, that was the story that was playing out. So I think Luger really, it was a misstep only in that it didn't benefit Luger in any way. But at the time, I don't know, I'd call it a misstep. I think it was unique.
Yeah, that's true. It was a certain way to go about things, and it made WrestleMania 10 a very unique show. That's also one of the best WrestleManias and one of the most unheralded WrestleManias of all time. So I think I'm okay with that. I mean, why don't we kind of put these together, missteps and rebookings, because I think we could do them interchangeably. Let's start from the beginning. We're not going to do every year, obviously, because some years the guy was, the choice was fine. And we're going to, because there are definitely years where it just wasn't the right choice because we think there could have been a better one, or B, in hindsight, looking ahead, looking into the future, WWF may have wanted to avoid this person winning. I think we all know what we're talking about there. Or we're looking ahead because something happened in history that adjusted a booking decision. But if it hadn't happened, then we probably would have had another choice. And I think we all know what we're talking about there. But we'll get to those. So we start from the beginning. We'll just go year by year very quickly. I would have definitely not had Jim Duggan win in '88. He ruined everything for everybody. And no, I'm only kidding.
You wouldn't have had Jim Duggan wrestling in the company. What are you talking?
Pretty much, Don Morocco, baby. No. All right. Let me ask you this one. Let's go through the portal for the first one. Looking back, I understand that from a nostalgia perspective, because they weren't sure what they were going to do with him in 1989, I could kind of see why they had Big John Studd win in 1989. But let's think about that for a minute, because obviously they ended up doing nothing. His body was broken down and he couldn't do anything. The best he did was be a referee for the Andre Jake match at WrestleMania 5. But looking back, Dave, go through the portal. We're going through the glass now. Should we pick a better choice for 1989?
Oh, yeah. Look, that's the Big John Studd win is it really is this eyesore now. It stands out like such a So, again, like you said, didn't necessarily know what to do with him. He was a big guy. Big guys often won Rumbles. Whether you call it a misstep at the time, look, at the beginning of 1989, you might not have called it that. But as you said, looking in hindsight, it really stands out. But to me, I don't think Stud winning the Rumble in '89 was the way to go. It had I guess it gave that face win at the time, but I'm not convinced that Stud. I mean, even then, he'd only just come back on television. He was only just there, so it really was sort of like that typical arrives back in everyone's view. Let's give him a win. Like if it was a Saturday night's main event, he would have had a match and would have had a win. That's the feel that it has. Even at the time, that was the feel. He's just come back. We give him a win to give him that little bit of a jump start. That's what it feels like, a little jump start that then ended up not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. So that's how I feel about Stud's win.
I still think the Hogan Savage stuff could have happened. What about a guy like geez, I can't, because of I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering if you have, the problem is you had Rude and Warrior in that, the whole weight thing earlier, but Rick Rude winning probably wouldn't have been too bad as a catalyst towards winning the IC belt at WrestleMania 5. That might not have been a bad choice if you wanted to think of a heel.
With those that were in the match and a heel, two options I'd throw out: the Big Boss Man. He had the status. He was the guy who was in the feud with the Mega Powers. He was in the middle of that whole incident.
Good choice, Dave.
With Hogan. He would have been legit. It would have been, he's the big guy, understandable. I know Akeem was the one who was there at the end, but I probably would have, you could have found a way to keep Bossman in. The other one from me, the one I always would have liked to have seen from a storyline perspective is I would have loved to have seen, like, maybe the Bossman and Akeem could have eliminated Big John Studd, and then Ted DiBiase literally pays them off in the ring, gives them money to jump out, and DiBiase wins without having to touch anyone. I always thought that would have been a good little storyline to really further DiBiase. Money can buy everything. Of course, DiBiase was falling out of the main event picture at that point. He'd finished his feud with Savage. He was sort of done, and he was starting to move back down into the mid card. So whether it was the best thing to do to have him win such a prominent featured match, I don't know, but it wouldn't have been any worse than Big John Studd.
Right. Yeah.
And you could have had, you do that. He pays off the Twin Towers. You could have had Hogan and Savage run back out and clean the ring out and pose, and everyone goes home happy.
Correct. And then Jesse can still stir the shit at the end of the night. The I smell a rat. Like Jesse would not let it go about Savage.
Yeah.
Good choice. I like that Big Boss Man one, Dave. That's a good one. I didn't think about that one. 90 we already talked about with the rest of the 90s for the most part seem to be fine. Well, maybe one. Obviously Hogan fine in 91, Flair fine, and obviously Flair very fine in 92.
Absolutely.
Now 93, of course, was the first year that the title shot would be used. And that, of course, went to Yoko, who would end up beating Brett at WrestleMania 9. And then we all know what happened after that. We won't get into that mess. I'm fine with Yoko. Some people think that like Savage should have won, and then we could have had Brett and Savage in the main event, which would have been an amazing main event. And then what would Hogan have done? Stolen Savage's thunder again? Yeah, I wouldn't change Yoko. Does any of that come to mind? Would you go through the glass and fix that? I don't think I would have. I think I'm fine with Yoko.
I think the thing for me was at the time, I felt it came a little out of nowhere. Yoko had only just come into the company. He had that sort of Survivor Series squash win, and it to me it sort of came out of nowhere, and it certainly propelled him, pushed him, and they had big plans for him, and I totally agree. You don't need to change it, but I think there's one guy. I wouldn't go down the Savage line. I think there's one guy who would have really benefited from the win. And because of the direction they were taking Yokozuna, he would have ended up in the main event picture anyway. And you could have delayed his main event drive by a couple of months, especially with what they ended up doing, having him drop the belt to Hogan and win it back at King of the Ring. You could have just put him in a title match at King of the Ring for the first time and had him win it there, and everything moves on from there. And you just all you do is remove the Hogan stain. But the one person I feel could have really benefited in 93 from winning the Rumble is Mr. Perfect. Because he had been heavily positioned leading up to the Rumble. He'd had the face turn, the match with Savage against Flair and Razor Ramon at Survivor Series. He was being pumped big time. He was in the feud with Ric Flair, who was about to leave. Perfect was going to get that victory in the loser, which actually was taped the week before the Rumble. The loser leaves town match.
Yes, from Raw. Yep.
So that was coming. That was in the cans, ready to be shown. He's getting this massive push all over the place, and I've always thought that because Flair didn't stay to WrestleMania, because he left early and they did the loser leaves town match on Raw, they could have given that Royal Rumble to Mr. Perfect. If he won that, I think it would have cemented him as a main event player, because it really feels after Flair left, Perfect felt a little directionless. They set him into this match with Lex Luger at WrestleMania, which was sort of a little bit of the revenge drive for Bobby Heenan, and Lex Luger's just arrived. But Perfect had been positioned as a main player and then seemed a little directionless after he sent Flair out. And I think if Perfect had been given the Rumble win, you could have built to the match with Bret Hart. They would have tore the house down the way they did at King of the Ring, give him a bit longer, give Perfect and Hart 25 minutes at WrestleMania, and my goodness, you're going to have one for the ages. And you could have had, Luger could have interfered in it and cost Perfect the match, and they could have set off a feud post WrestleMania. You could have had Yokozuna win earlier in the night, squashing someone else, and challenge the winner. I'm going to face the winner. And even at the end of the show, he could have walked out and pointed and done all sorts of stuff. You really could have gotten around everything they did with Hogan. And I just think there's a case to be made that I think Perfect would have benefited more from winning the Rumble than Yokozuna did in the longer term, because that would have set Perfect into a main event position for a little bit longer and may have eventually helped. We know that as the year went on, Perfect, he fights Michaels, and then he's shunted down to sort of feud with Diesel, who'd only just arrived. So he goes from the main event slot to lower mid card in the space of 6 months. And I wonder if they could have done more with him throughout the year if they'd given him that little push and that little drive.
That's a good point. I kind of dig that. 93 was such an interesting year to think about, because they were still in a state of flux in that aspect. The roster was kind of turning over. Vince was slowly getting involved in the legal issues with steroids. So Yoko was a perfect guy for him because, obviously Vince was always a big fan of big dudes, whether they were muscular or fat, depending on whether they were heels or faces. But he was a guy who kind of grounded the heels and was a good heel throughout the end of '93. So I like your perfect and theory there. Having said that, Yoko's not a problem, so we're not totally crapping on it. We just think '93 might have been a year where you could have had another choice or two. 94 we've already gotten into. The next few I think are fine. Shawn winning back-to-back 95, 96. There was no other choices there.
No.
Steve winning in 97. 97 was kind of screwed up, and, they wanted to push, the whole thing was pushing Austin as this son of a bitch.
It was I love the 97 finish. I think it's a great finish. Austin being eliminated, the referee's not seeing it and jumping back in, and I think it is a great finish. It's actually one of my favorite finishes. I love the unique finishes in a Rumble. I like it when they try something different, and that's one of them. That there's another one I know, and look, we're not going to look at this Rumble. It's not one we're going to be focusing on tonight. But I love, whether you like the overall event or how that goes, the little finish at the end of the 2011 Rumble when Santino comes up from under the ring, and after Alberto Del Rio thinks he's won it. It's different. It's just that little moment where they look at something different. Those are the sorts of things I quite enjoy. So Austin's 97 win, I think, is a really great piece of storytelling.
It is. And it led to all of the issues. You weren't sure what you were going to do with the world title. Obviously, we didn't know about the whole losing a smile and all that kind of stuff. Because everything pretty much was supposed to be Shawn Brett 2, the sequel to WrestleMania 12. We all know what happened there. But I like that ending too. I don't know if I'd change that either. I think it made I think it kind of made the unpredictability of 1997, like it set the table. So I was fine with that. And
I've got a quick question for you, though. I've got a quick question about this. The next event, our In Your House Final Four, was built around the idea that Bret Hart, Undertaker, Steve Austin, and Vader were the final four men in the Rumble. But the thing is, they weren't, because Vader was eliminated before our fake Diesel. And I've always thought, what would have happened? That sort of fake Diesel character sort of gets a little bit screwed over here. Why wasn't he complaining and up and up about
I love you, Dave Hall. That's that. Could you imagine fake Diesel in the main event? That would have been absolutely tremendous. I kind of dig that. Could you imagine fake Diesel in the main event of In Your House It's Time? We wouldn't have gotten to see, Vader's eyeball falling out of his head.
That was brutal. That he really. And again, I know you guys have talked about it on you and Justin have talked about it on other shows and stuff. But I really another man who a lot of missteps with his booking was Vader, and what he showed in that match, you would have thought surely they could have done more with him. Even coming out of that, he had a lot of momentum after his gutsy performance there, and then he just got thrown into tag matches and buried again. So
right, but his mask was pretty much holding his face together. Anyway, obviously Austin in '98, self-explanatory. That had to happen, obviously. Which brings us to one of the most probably hackneyed Rumbles of all time, and that is, of course, 1999 in Anaheim, won by Vince McMahon. Obviously, it was a pure hook for the next night on Raw that would lead towards the cage match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and it would end up leading to Rock and Austin at WrestleMania 15. So would we keep Vince as the winner simply because it was a catalyst to what would happen over the next couple of months? I've always contended, Dave, that my favorite WrestleMania build of all time is Vince and Steve, starting at In Your House Breakdown in September of '98, where he loses the belt, all the way to WrestleMania 15 when he beats The Rock. I love that. I love that build forever. That next to the Mega Powers. So is it okay for Vince to win because down the line it was meant to lead us to where we were going? Or did Vince winning, kind of considering he spent most of the match at the commentary table, does it cheapen the Rumble because Vince won? Or is it okay because really it was just meant to, execute
build
plan.
story. Yeah.
Right. Execute that. Sorry, I was trying to think of the right word.
Yeah.
Execute the next phase of the story with Vince and Stone Cold. So are you okay with Vince winning it, even though it kind of cheapens the Rumble because he really didn't do anything?
I am okay with him winning it because it fits the like you said, the storyline was perfectly laid out, and where they took it afterwards, it was planned and ready to go. It wasn't a booking on the fly. It wasn't trying to do it, and it didn't come across as Vince trying to placate his own ego. I think later in the year, when we get the Vince holding the world title, that to me is a bigger issue. But him winning the Rumble, I think, fits storyline because he was always out of his depth. It was the cowardly thing. He only won because The Rock came down and distracted and grabbed Austin. And you watch that match, that if it hadn't been for The Rock, Austin would have destroyed Vince and would have won the match. So I feel that the way they booked it made it work. If they'd had Vince hold his own, or Vince throw, without The Rock's interference, Vince throw Austin out on his own, I think that would have been a significant problem. But the way they booked it and executed it was it fit the characters. It was believable. You knew Vince had no shot at winning this if Rock hadn't come down. And I think that's why it does work. And of course, then I love the next night. I always love that promo where he gets up and he says, I give up all rights and privileges as the winner. And then Sean comes on as the GM and says, well, you stepped out, and the rule book says that means the person who was runner-up gets it. I love that little promo and that continuation of the storyline.
I do too. And all right, because I love that. And let me go to the WWF rule book, and he pulls out the bottle of Jack. Because that's my WWF rule book too. So all right, 2000. So we get into the 2000s. I have no problem with the Rock winning. Although the whole thing with Big Show, did that kind of like gobbledygook it for you?
Yeah, I think where they were at the time, Rock could have won clean. Rock could have clotheslined him. Rock could have slammed him out. I mean, they didn't need that. They sort of hark back to the 94 result and sort of almost recycle the storyline to try and generate some suspense. But I think I think Rock should have just won straight outright clean. No dispute, no doubt.
Yeah, I just I wanted The Rock to win, but I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to because I was at No Way Out 2000 in Hartford, and I know they were trying to spin the things, because if you had Big Show win, then then you had a sense of intrigue going into the Hell in a Cell match, that maybe Foley doesn't lose. So I got why they did that. It just didn't make any sense. They should have just had Rock win it and beat the Big Show and then roll with it. So, Austin in 01, no problem. Triple H in 02, no problem. 2003 is a funky one, because this was the first year that we had two titles. We hadn't had the winner's choice yet. We'll get to that the following year. So obviously Triple H was your World Heavyweight Champion and Kurt Angle was your WWE Champion. They chose to go the WWE Champion route and have Brock Lesnar win. And Brock fought Kurt, and eventually Triple H fought Booker T. And we all know how that feud went. We won't get into that. I think I'm okay with that. I mean, you could have had Booker T win the Rumble. You could have just flipped the belt and had Booker T win the Rumble.
I think you could have, but I think with what they were wanting to do, what they've been doing with Brock, and where the whole Brock push was, I think Brock was the right winner. I think they really had been doing so much with him through the year. A Rumble victory seems to be just the next step, another cap in that journey. It set up the guaranteed match that everyone wanted to see at Mania, which was Brock versus Kurt. I know that all the injuries sort of impacted on, and that was still an amazing match. I was going to say impact on how that match turned out. I mean, and it did a little, but I mean, imagine if Kurt had been 100% and Brock didn't nearly break his neck in the process either. I mean, just that was an outstanding match. You know, I think that if they'd given the Rumble to Booker like you suggested, I want it would have. It works. It carries the storyline, but I think that the SmackDown is what carried that WrestleMania. That Brock Lesnar Kurt Angle match is what people were wanting to see. No offense to the Triple H fans, but I don't think the fans were at the time of the Royal Rumble was sitting there going, Triple H versus Booker T is going to make me want to buy that event. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I feel like WrestleMania 19, and eventually we'll do a Mania show, obviously. But WrestleMania 19 is just a great show because just the matches were good. Maybe the stories. I think a lot of the secondary matches is what carried that show. Maybe not necessarily Kurt versus Brock and Triple H versus Booker, the title matches, but you had Austin Rock 3, which many kind of felt like was the last one. You had Shawn and Jericho. You had Hogan. One of my favorite Vince matches. I love that Hogan Vince match. That's absolute. That is absolute guilty pleasure for me. A lot of people hate it. I love it. So I feel like the Rumble there was almost inconsequential because that WrestleMania was more driven by the returns and the mid-card matches and stuff more than even the title matches. So yeah, I agree with you. There's really no need to really change that because I don't think it really mattered in the grand scheme of things. So, all right, we are definitely going through the looking glass on this one, Dave, because we go to 2004 in Philadelphia, the first year that winner's choice, and we all know who won this match. It was He Who Shall Not Be. Well, we'll say the Voldemort of, as we say, of professional wrestling. He Who Shall Not Be Named. So obviously, let's pretend that the WWF knew what would happen in 3 years. Okay. And to avoid
it's only 3 years too. 3 years later, it really, just it makes it even harder, doesn't it?
Yeah, 3.5 years. 3.5 years. It's mind-boggling. So let's think about this. WWF decides, you know what? I've looked through Scott and Dave's looking glass. This is not going to end well, and we don't feel like having to vacate or erase history. It's one thing that the guy's in matches. It's another thing that he actually sets a record for being in the Rumble. So let's backtrack. Let's go to 2004, and who else could be chosen to win this Royal Rumble? So 2004 Royal Rumble, we are not having Chris Benoit win because WWF realizes what happened in 3.5 years, and we don't feel like erasing history. So 2004.
Well, let's start with I want to straight out rule out the easy option. The easy option would be to turn around and say, well, Eddie Guerrero ended up winning the world title on SmackDown, so Eddie Guerrero could win the Rumble. And that's the easy way out. I think that's
Right.
too easy, especially the story leading in, which was this is the Rumble where he stole. Isn't this the Rumble where he tried to steal Ric Flair's? Is this the one where he tried to steal Ric Flair's number, or was that the following?
I think
year?
so.
Yeah.
No, I think it was this one.
Yeah.
I think it was this one because the following year Eddie's like 2. So
yeah.
yeah.
So I think I think it's too easy to just go Eddie. That's too simple. When you look at who was in that Rumble, I don't think there's not a lot of standouts for me, because you've obviously got a lot of the key players in other matches. Triple H fought Shawn Michaels. You had Brock Lesnar in a world title match, thankfully against Hardcore Holly, so we don't have to worry about a real contender being there. But I also would suggest it would also be easy to say, well, what about someone like Goldberg? But the WWE, I think, already knew where things were going with Goldberg. I think he was on a 1-year contract, and I think he'd already let them know that he was not going to hang around. I think he'd given that impression that he was not happy with how he'd been booked and he was not going to hang around. So then you've written out another option.
Mm-hmm.
The guy I'd like to throw out as a potential winner for the 04 Rumble, if you're going back through the looking glass, a guy I feel would have benefited from it. I think the storylines would have allowed it to work. And I think is someone who doesn't have a Rumble to his resume and thoroughly deserves one, is Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle was back in the company after his injury. He was at the top of his game in the ring. He was outstanding. And I think if you had given him the win there, you really would have laid out some interesting thought processes, because you had earlier in the night, you had the confrontation between Brock and Goldberg, which is what they were using to set up that Mania match. But if Kurt had won the Rumble, you would have been sitting there going, well, you've got Brock Goldberg, but we could be getting a rematch of Brock Kurt, and that would be outstanding as well. And then you can still run the storylines that they ended up post-running. Kurt thinks, I'm going to be facing Brock, and then Eddie wins the title, and then it switches. Okay, well, I'm not facing Brock anymore. I'm facing Eddie. And you still get the WrestleMania match that you got. But I think Kurt winning the Rumble would have been a real... I think he deserved it. I think he's the one person in that ring of that match who had the credibility to... he could go either way. Could Kurt have chosen to go against Triple H? I mean, there's another match that would have been something that I think would have made a lot of people's mouths water is, well, maybe Triple H and Kurt could have fought at WrestleMania instead of He Who Shall Not Be Named, and or even a three-way. Imagine Kurt, Shawn, and Hunter in a three-way match at WrestleMania. I just think the doors that a Kurt Angle victory opens up is just enormous. You don't lose anything in the long run, and I think you gain a lot more with the potential options. If they wanted to go with, well, Kurt's going to switch to Raw, that would have worked, and the matchups that opens up as a result. If Kurt stays on SmackDown, we get what we ended up getting with Kurt and Eddie at Mania. I think Kurt would have been a great option there.
That's not a bad choice. I like that choice, Kurt. I'm thinking of other guys on Raw that could have faced Triple H. I mean, you could have had Shawn win the Rumble,
but he just fought Triple H in for the
in
world
the
title
at the
at
Rumble
that show.
on that night. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
So he was out of the mix. I mean, when you look
Out of
at
the
the
mix.
Raw
Yeah,
options, at the time, you had Randy Orton in at 2, and they were building the Foley match, and Orton was still, that was Evolution, the growth of the Legend Killer. It was too early
yeah.
for
He had just
him.
won the IC belt the month before, so he wasn't
Yeah,
ready.
you've got Matt
Um,
Hardy, you've got Scott Steiner, who he's dead and buried by this point. You've got Hurricane, you've got Booker T, you've got Kane, who he's done, Spike Dudley, Rene Dupree, Foley, Christian. Christian was probably not up there ready to go yet. Chris Jericho was on Raw at the time, and the Jericho another Jericho Triple H thing be the go. The only other potential Raw option could be Rob Van Dam.
I have another one that's kind of crazy. You're gonna think I'm nuts, but I like the RVD one because he back-to-back years, 2001 and 2002, he kind of got screwed over. Some people think he should have won the belt at No Mercy '01, and then of course we all know what happened with him and Triple H a year later. But what about this? You're gonna think I'm absolutely nuts. Why not, for the hell of it, Ric Flair? Flair wins the Rumble. Eddie still beats Brock at No Way Out, and we have Eddie and Flair at WrestleMania 20.
That would have been a sensational capper. It would have been interesting to see Flair in that position at that time. He was still in the process of rebuilding. I've got an argument for perhaps another Flair one down the line, which we can get to shortly. But that would have been an interesting outcome. Although the whole how that would have played in with the Evolution thing would have been interesting.
Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I think it would have been great because Evolution were heels were still top flight heels. They could have totally pimped it up, like, Flair. Evolution starts running in at on SmackDown and starts messing with Eddie, and Evolution trying to win both belts, and then a year later,
that's where I was going to say, it would really, the payoff would be more the year later when Batista wins, and they could revisit it. Well, hey, we did this last year. This year we could do it, and we could win the belts or whatever. And then, of course, Batista decides, no, we'll go the other way. But right. I think the payoff would have been felt more 12 months later.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't know. I kind of like that. I kind of like having like a nostalgia one there with Flair winning, because everybody else, we were still kind of in a transition of the ruthless aggression part of the roster. Cena wasn't ready. Batista wasn't ready. Orton wasn't ready. Not quite there yet. They had other stuff going on that we needed big time secondary, mid-card matches at Mania at the Garden for. So that wasn't going to fly. I like Kurt. And I think I like Flair. I think those are two fun choices for 2004 to replace He Shall Not Be Named. If WWE looked to the future and went, yeah, we can't do this. we can't rip pages out of the WWF encyclopedia, which pretty much I feel like we've done. So, all right, Flair and Kurt Angle. I like those choices. Those are pretty good choices for 2004. And that is obviously sticking with the plan of Eddie winning the world title from Brock at No Way Out. And then we would have to go with, let's extend this for a second, Dave. So let's say Flair wins the Rumble, and he does go after the WWE title, and he shows up at No Way Out and sits and watches Brock versus Eddie. Who do you have face Triple H for the World Heavyweight title? You can't have Shawn again because you just burned that at the Rumble. Or on the other hand, do you decide that if that's the case, you don't have Triple H and Shawn at the Rumble because you may need it at WrestleMania? They do like, the last time.
The
or
last
book it
time.
as such.
Do you book the finish as? I mean, we got our Rumble match because they had the. Was it a time limit draw on Raw that they'd had, or a double knockout, or something?
Yeah, it was
like
a time limit. It was a draw. It was a draw. It was the last Raw of 2003 in San Antonio. Triple H, Shawn thought he won, but Shawn thought he won.
So,
but
yeah,
but Bischoff kind of dicked him over.
Do you do another non-finish? Do you do something? Whether it be Shawn wins by DQ or by countout. Maybe Triple H does a runner and you set up a cage match at WrestleMania. Shawn and Hunter in a cage would have been outstanding. Do you do? I don't know. You could do another time limit draw, and I'm not sure I'd want to see the old knockout, the double knockout. I don't think works. We've seen that too many times as well. But you could have done Hunter doing the runner, Evolution getting involved. Batista and Flair hit the ring, or all three of them, all four of them hit the ring and beat on Shawn to set up a cage match where Evolution can't get in the ring. I think you could have come up with some options there to keep Shawn in the mix. You could have done the whole thing. Well, if Flair's going to come over to SmackDown and take my title shot, maybe Kurt goes, well, I'm coming to Raw and I'm going to take your title, and you could have the crossover that way. There's a couple of options there.
Yeah, I agree. There's certain ways to go about that one. I like your Kurt one though. That's really good. So we definitely had to go through the looking glass on that one because obviously, as we said, WWF is not too keen on tearing pages out of encyclopedias. 2005, obviously Batista winning is no problem. I had asked you in our pre-planning, and you were not too keen on wanting to switch it, but obviously if you decide you want Cena to win the Rumble, you could just do a tournament for Triple H's. You could have just flipped the script and had the tournament for Triple H's belt instead of the tournament for JBL's belt. So there's really nothing to change there. You just kind of flip the pages of the storyline from one show to the other. So
yeah, it's an easy flip, but I think the storyline that came out of it with Batista, with everyone encouraging, like Triple H and Flair saying, Batista, you can go after JBL and you can do this, and Teddy Long trying to woo him over in sort of retaliation for what happened the year before. I think that storyline just worked so well. And if you did a tournament, it might have been a little bit tougher to make it work because you would have had from the beginning, well, why is Batista entering the tournament to start with? It would have created that tension a little bit more as opposed to that idea that Batista always seemed to be a step ahead of Triple H. It was that one. That was why I always liked that Batista storyline because you had the cerebral assassin, the person who everyone thought was the smartest guy in the company as a character portrayal. And they had, the Evolution storyline had been that Batista was the big muscle-bound dummy who had no idea what was happening. Flair and Triple H talk about him behind his back, but you always had Batista was always that step ahead. He knew what was going on. He knew where it was going, and it made that storyline work so well. And I just don't think it works as well if you run a tournament or if he has to be in a number one contender match, because then it telegraphs him being in the position of, well, I'm still going to go for it. As opposed to, well, I can make them think I'm going to fight JBL. I'm going to make them think that they've got it all worked out when they really don't.
Great call. I agree with you 100%. Perfectly fine keeping Batista winning it in 2005. Cena was perfectly fine. SmackDown was different. JBL, I like the whole storyline with Evolution alleging that JBL tried to run Batista down with the car, with the limo with the horns on it. I wouldn't change any of that for anything. This next one we're definitely changing. 2006 down in Miami. Of course, that Rumble won by Rey Mysterio. But it is obviously evident. I mean, duh. Eddie Guerrero does not die, and Rey Mysterio is not winning that Rumble. End of story. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Eddie's alive. Rey does not win. So we go through the looking glass, and we actually change history. And we wish we could do this in real life because we would love for Eddie Guerrero to still be here with us. Eddie's not dead, which is a good thing. So Eddie does not die. He's alive when we get to 2006, and I think that one was in Miami. I think it was in Miami. Yes, because that was the one where Vince had the issue with the tanning salon cashier or some fucking weird thing that went on. So where do we go in 2006? What are some choices?
So did I take it from what you just said that Eddie is still with us in our 06 Rumble, or are we just saying that we don't want Rey to win it?
Well, no, it's not that we don't want Rey to win it, but it's pretty obvious. Eddie doesn't die, and there's no
Rey
tribute win and tribute crap, and we don't get that whole thing. So it's not that we don't.
What's the plan? What's the plan? What should have been the plan for the Rumble? If we discount what happened with Eddie, what should have been the plan with the Rumble? I
wonder, because remember, when Eddie was one of Eddie's last things before he passed away, he was a heel, and at No Mercy 05, he took on Batista. So he was feuding. He was on SmackDown, and he was feuding for the world title.
The rumors were that he was scheduled to win the title from Batista the SmackDown after he passed away. That was the big rumor that was running around. He was due to win the belt that episode of SmackDown. So in theory, he was going to be heading into this Rumble as the champion.
Yeah. Now we look at the SmackDown crew. Do you go with Randy Orton? Because obviously they wanted Orton in the main event because they do get him to beat Rey at No Way Out 06. Anyway.
Yeah.
You know, they had him at No Way. He beats Rey at No Way Out 06, and then somehow, Teddy Long waggles it and Rey gets back in the match. So with Rey not scheduled to win, do you have Orton win the Rumble and lead towards? Because I have a feeling that Triple H for Cena was always meant to be the main event of WrestleMania 22. I think they were destined. Triple H was, because now it was time for Cena after going through 05, feuding with JBL. Then he gets drafted to Raw. He feuds with Jericho. That's a good feud. Then the Kurt feud starts, and that's when he starts getting booed because all the guy wrestlers think that he can't fucking wrestle. It was okay with Jericho, but now that he's got to wrestle a guy who, in their eyes, can wrestle circles around Cena, that's when the divide starts.
And I think the big thing was there is that I think Kurt Angle had hit the point where he'd reached that Ric Flair status. He'd reached that status of, we like this guy. We like this guy regardless of how you book him. And, whether he's a heel or face, we like him, we respect him. But more to the point, I think that the fans had hit the point where it was like, and we feel Kurt Angle has been getting dicked around for too long now. He's never got the position or the role that a lot of people felt he deserved. And I think that's what did John Cena in more than anything else. It was that everyone thought Kurt Angle should be the world champion, should have a long championship run, and was not getting the look in, was not getting the view that way, and John Cena was the one who paid the price for it. I think if they put Batista in the same position, I don't think it would have been as big a backlash because Batista had his his popularity had been growing that year. But it wouldn't surprise me if a similar thing started to happen to Batista if they put him in the same position. I think it was more about who Kurt Angle was rather than what people really thought of Cena.
Yeah, that's true. And Triple H obviously was a guy who they wanted to kind of get that justification win, which they feel that Cena hadn't gotten yet. So something tells me that was destined to happen either way. So the Rumble winner in 2006 was going to be whoever was going to face the World Heavyweight Champion on SmackDown. So, right. So if the assumption is that Eddie was winning the belt on that SmackDown before he passed away, he probably would have been the champion through 2005 and into 2006. Now, I don't know who he would have wrestled at the 2006 Rumble. Maybe Batista again. Let's also not forget, Dave, we can also change history here. Does Batista get hurt and disappear for the first half of 2006? Because that's another thing that we forget about, is that Batista pops his pec muscle?
Was it? Yeah, it was. I think
no, it was a tricep. It was his pec. So he's out till I think June. So or early July, I think he came back. So we're not sure if Eddie's champion and Batista's healthy. I don't see Batista winning the Rumble again.
I think they would have had their rematch at the Royal Rumble. They would have been in that world title match. So
yeah, that's a great call. I agree with you on that. So we assume that Batista will go off and do something else. Does Batista wrestle Cena at 22? Nah, because I still think it was destined to be Cena and Triple H. I
think you're right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, I think it was destined to be Cena and Triple H. So how about do you have Edge win the Rumble? Well,
except his storyline was built around that time period, and you had him with John Cena there,
right?
A name to throw. I mean, look, I think Randy Orton was probably the man that the WWE, that Vince McMahon had slated to win the Rumble before everything that happened with Eddie occurred. I think Randy was the one they were going to give it to. I think that's because, again, like you said, he was then put back into the slot anyway. He faced Ray at the next event, and then we had that 3-way match at WrestleMania. So they did everything they could to put Randy Orton into the WrestleMania main event. So I think he was always destined to win it. But the name, and I mentioned this name before, but a name to throw out there that I think 2006 might have been a real opportunity to put him forward and break him out is Rob Van Dam. Rob had just come back from injury late 2005. We know that Rob Van Dam ends up on the direction of the whole one night stand journey is coming up, and what happened there with ECW. A Rob Van Dam victory at the Royal Rumble here, I don't think would have been out of place. I think it would have allowed them. He could have faced whoever was on SmackDown, whatever champion, whether it was Eddie was still alive, whether it was Batista, whether it was Mark Henry, Kurt Angle, or whoever. Rob Van Dam could have done that, and they could have had him. Whether he wins that or not, I don't know. I know that the storyline we end up getting with the Money in the Bank and the build up into One Night Stand that's a fantastic storyline that you almost don't want to change. But in terms of at the time of the 2006 Rumble, who has potential to win it and who would have benefited from it and who I think would have been accepted as a winner, I think Rob Van Dam is probably the only other person outside of Randy Orton that competed in that event that would have been a justifiable winner.
Mm. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, there's a lot that could be put around there. SmackDown was kind of wide open, and if Eddie is champion, I think you could have put a lot of pieces in there. And plus, I feel like they wanted Edge to work with Foley. I feel like that was something to justify Edge as a frontline guy. So
yeah, you had Shawn Michaels on the trajectory to face Vince McMahon. That storyline was going to happen regardless as well.
Right. No, I agree. So no, I like those choices. It's a pretty good choices there. 06 is a fun one to rebook because there's a lot of opportunities there. If we go back in time and we keep Eddie alive and Batista doesn't pop his pec. So 2007, I think they wanted Taker to win because I think they wanted Taker Batista. I think we were set for Shawn and here's the thing. I wonder, again, we could go through the looking glass, not pop Triple H's quad at New Year's Revolution 07 because supposedly we were going to get a Triple H Cena rematch with Triple H winning. I don't know if that was set in stone or not because obviously Shawn Michaels was at this point in his career where he didn't want title matches. He'd gone through that. He wanted to just put on great matches and put over talent, et cetera, et cetera. So let's think about Triple H not hurt at New Year's Revolution, and he's in the mix. Do you still have Taker win? Probably.
I think so. I think that was. I think that's a culmination of a few things. That's a bit of recognition to who Taker was, the longevity. He'd never won one. He was full time. They were wanting to put him in some of those key spots, and he deserved that run. And the match that he and Batista had, I mean, that's a classic. That was one that caught everyone by surprise, I think, of how good that match ended up being. I wouldn't want to change that. I think Taker, as much as I certainly agree they may have been looking at building Triple H into that spot and the rematch, I think what we got was the perfect storyline. And the ending of that match was a good finish too. So, we had that was the classic ending. Long ending with HBK and all that.
10 or 11 minutes they went.
That was outstanding. I wouldn't want to change that. Through the looking glass, I wouldn't want to change that in any way.
No, I wouldn't either. 2008, of course, we saw what happened to Madison Square Garden, the big return of John Cena, who came back early from the injury. I think Triple H was meant to win that one too. Obviously we would end up having a triple threat between Triple H, Cena, and Orton. Orton, of course, was the champion at the time. And we ended up having Edge and Taker at in the main event. So I don't think that changes.
No, I don't think it does, but this is the one that I'd like to throw out my little dream scenario, because this is where I'd like to bring the Ric Flair thing to culmination, because I would have loved, this is the one I would have loved Flair to have, because this was the if you lose storyline, you're forced to retire. And I would have loved to have seen them throw Flair in to the Rumble. Vince McMahon throws him into the Rumble. If you lose, you're gone. Flair, 30 men. What is going to happen? He could have got all the sympathy from Triple H and all the sympathy from everyone, but and at the same time, guys like Triple H going, I feel for you. I don't want you to retire, but I want the title shot. I've got to do what I've got to do, and I would have loved a storyline where Flair comes out in that late, even that 30 slot that Cena came out at, Flair comes out at 30. The place erupts. He comes out and somehow pulls the win, and so he goes into WrestleMania and has his career-threatening match at Mania. He's going for gold. The champion of champions, Ric Flair, most world championships at that point of anyone. Can he win another one? Can he pull off the miracle, or will it be his last match? I always think it would have just added a little bit extra to that final match for Flair. He could have, you could have built with Elimination Chamber, anyone could have been world champion for Flair to face. It could have been Michaels, it could have been Hunter, it could have been anyone, because you've got the Elimination Chamber to put the title on someone. I just think it would have been a fun storyline. I'm not saying it's the right storyline, but I think it would have been a fun storyline.
I'd sign up for that. Why not? Why not?
To have even more. I'm just thinking off the cuff, to have even more fun for it. And yeah, people might sit there and go, "Oh, but because of his age, would he have any? Could he justifiably win a Rumble?" You could have even done something where everyone in the ring is fighting and wrestling at the edge of the ropes, and as Flair enters the ring, everyone else gets eliminated. So Flair literally steps into the ring and is named the winner without even having to eliminate anyone.
That would have been hilarious. That's possible. Why not?
So, yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I cried, obviously, at WrestleMania 24. And I remember that night after on Raw with the ceremony and, with the ceremony and, the Horsemen coming out and everything. Like that was very, very, emotional for me. So to have that included and put the title on the line in that same, that would have been, very emotional. But, and I like WrestleMania 24, but I wonder if that might have helped things. I'm not sure.
Especially if he was going for the big gold belt.
Yes.
Just the history of that.
The belt he made famous. Absolutely. Yes. He designed it and he made it famous. Other than that, I think 08, I don't think there was really any other choices in that
totally
case.
Agree.
No, because it was eventually, because Taker Edge was already kind of built in throughout 07, going back to when Edge cashed in on him in the spring to take the world title from him. And then Edge screwed him over again at Armageddon. And that Taker Edge match was ready built. So 2009, I think that was destined to be Orton, because they were leading towards Orton and Triple H at 25. Yeah. So that, I don't think there's any change there.
Absolutely.
This one I would have definitely changed. If this is the one I'm thinking of. No, I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm thinking of 2011, which we'll get to in a minute. So 2010, of course, was won by Edge, who came back from injury. And he comes back from injury and wins the Rumble in Atlanta, because that leads toward him and former tag team partner Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 26. You already got Cena, Batista, and then you got Edge and Jericho. I don't really see. I mean, let's be honest, Dave. WrestleMania 26 is totally was totally built on Vince, Brett, and then Taker, Shawn 2. So did it really matter who won the Rumble? To be quite honest,
no, that's it.
Like,
and
2003,
I think when you look at 2010, the only other option I see for 2010 is Jericho. You just flip it. Jericho wins, and then you just flip the storyline, and Edge wins the title, and Jericho and Edge still end up wrestling each other. So, it's sort of that. That this is one where I can't see much different there.
Yeah, no, I concur on that. I think that's fine. 2011, which is of course the first 40-man Rumble. I would change this one immediately. For two reasons. Number one, there's better guys. And number two, I just can't stand Del Rio. The fact that he wins the Rumble and he wins Money in the Bank in the same year. I mean, they really were throwing their chips at him in 2011. That was just hot garbage.
Now this is where I say it. yeah, Santino comes out, Santino eliminates him, and Santino goes to WrestleMania.
Could you
No,
imagine?
no,
So,
no.
I mean, Edge is our world champion, and The Miz is our WWE champion. Now, obviously, they were probably leaning towards Cena and Miz anyway, because it was really beginning what would end up being a 2-year story between Cena and The Rock. So I think they were kind of set on Cena Miz at 27. I got to think of better guys too. You know who I would have had? How about this one? Tell me if this is float your boat, Dave. Edge is world champion. Why not have Christian win the Rumble?
Oh, that would have been a fantastic result. Was he back by this point?
I think, yeah, because he came back in 2009 because he
I
won
know
the.
I know that he was there by the time Mania happened, but was Christian? I'm trying to find him in the list of competitors for the match, because he didn't actually compete in that 40-man Rumble. But I know he was there by Mania because we had the whole thing where, Edge is hurt, Edge doesn't carry on, and then Christian picks it up post Mania and has that ends up having that great feud with Randy Orton, and I love that feud. That's a great. I know you guys have been talking about it recently, and that's a fantastic thing. But I'm not sure whether he was injured or whether he was actually back at this point.
I guess not. Yeah, he's at Mania. Was he still in Impact?
So let's have a look here. He was certainly back in 2009. So he definitely was around.
Yeah, because Backlash 2009, I was at. In fact, JR and I were at. It was in Providence, and that's when he won the ECW title. So,
so he was defending the ECW title in December at the Royal Rumble. Oh, he was defending the ECW. No, that's 2010. He defended in 2010 Rumble. We sort of go through 2010. He's moving around. So I'm just not sure. Christian, he was injured at the Rumble. He didn't make his return until the Elimination Chamber.
Okay.
So he'd been injured in September, and then returned in February. So he just misses out. If we could have got him back with the miracle recovery, I think that was actually, if I remember right, there were a lot of people that were tipping that he would be back, predicting that he would be back in a similar way to what they'd done with Edge and John Cena. That was the return from injury was going to be the Rumble, and then he didn't do it. They didn't pull the trigger, and probably because it would have had that we've been there, done that storyline before. But Christian would have been that. I agree with you. Put Christian in there, and it would have been a really interesting outcome to have Christian and Edge face each other, especially when it ends up being Edge's last match for some time.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't think. I mean, I'm looking at the 2011 list.
The only other person I think that that they could have done something with or made it work is you've got Punk, and you've got Punk with the next Nexus, and you had that point where he had his entire stable in the ring with him, and they were just throwing everyone out as they came in, and then we had Super Cena come in and basically get rid of everyone. But you could have carried that a little bit further, maybe doing that whole thing with Punk and the new Nexus, taking Punk all the way to the end and protecting him. And we know where Punk goes in 2011, and we know everything that happened with him. Punk, I think, with where his momentum was at that point, Punk would have been a viable option as a winner. I don't think it would have come out of left field because there was a lot of momentum on his side. He'd done the commentary thing, he'd done the new Nexus, that sort of came out of nowhere, but it was very much Punk taking things into his own hands, and he was getting a lot of television time and a lot of a push at that point. So it could have been an option. I don't know if it was the right time, but they certainly could have utilized the new Nexus to carry him through to the end. And you could have even done something where, you don't have to do this. You can't have Punk come in at 1. You would have needed to do Punk coming in later and the Nexus come in later, and then they sort of clear the ring for a while. You could have done that whole bit just later in the event. And then you could have had Punk sort of realizing, well, we're nearly down to the end. And so he starts, I don't need you anymore. Out goes a member of the new Nexus because I don't need you in this ring anymore. Michael McGillicuddy, you're out of here. Husky Harris, you're out of here.
Right.
And he just sort of turns around with them sort of going, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm the boss. You do what I say.
Right. Because he comes in at 1, and I'm thinking, wow, there's a guy who's, Although if we look through the looking glass, do we want to give Punk anything? But obviously we did a lot of Punk on our premiere episode. So
yeah,
no, I like that. I like that thinking, and you kind of make after poor Nexus got friggin' annihilated by Cena at SummerSlam for literally no reason whatsoever. But you're building towards Cena. I think they already had it locked in for Cena versus Miz because they wanted to get The Rock involved. So
absolutely.
So we're fine on that. So good choices there. I like that Punk build. That's a good one, Dave.
But I like your Christian idea of get him back in early and give him the win. I think that would have been a really good match, him and Edge.
Yeah, I agree. 2012, I don't want to change because I made a killer pick here on the Place Be podcast. I totally predicted in like October of 11 that Sheamus was going to win this Rumble. So I don't want to break that because that's one of my favorite pull out of my ass picks of all time that I picked Sheamus to win the 2012 Rumble. And I'm fine with it because I think they were leading towards somebody to face Daniel Bryan because I think they had Punk Jericho locked in for 27.
And unfortunately, when you look at this Rumble, there are not a lot of other options. There really
isn't.
All their big name players were on the undercard, and it was such a loaded undercard. You had Daniel Bryan, Big Show, Mark Henry in a triple threat. Kane, Cena, Punk, Ziggler. You'd emptied the match to the point that you only had a couple of options. They were the guys that were in at the end. Sheamus is one, and then you're sitting there with Randy Orton, who's already won by now. Chris Jericho. You've got Jericho back, and maybe you could have done a Jericho thing, but we've been down that track. To me, that's the only person who could potentially have won this outside of Sheamus, because number 30 was Big Show, and his career was dead by this point. So to me, outside of Sheamus, the only other person who could have won would have been Jericho, and it would have been one of those sort of legacy. You've been with the company on and off for so long. He's almost like, sort of like a take a win or those guys who've been around forever. Here's a win. We can always rely on you to do what we need you to do and to do a good, wrestle a good enough match at a WrestleMania main event that Jericho would have been acceptable, but I think Sheamus is the only option.
Yeah, I think so too. 2013, I think this was totally, obviously totally going to be Cena because obviously Rock was beating Punk and we were supposed to have Rock and Cena 2 at WrestleMania 29 at MetLife, which I was at, so we won't touch that one.
Was it necessary though? I mean, we all knew that we were going to get Cena Rock. We knew that was going to happen, We'd known that since the day after WrestleMania the year before. So did we really need it? Is there someone else? I mean, could we've had someone go down? Is there another option? I mean, was it a better option to put someone to get a winner who would face Alberto Del Rio or whoever was the champion on that side, on the other brand? Is that the better option?
I mean, a lot of people have always discussed that second. First of all, everyone thinks that second Cena Rock match wasn't even needed, because we spent all of between WrestleManias 27 and 28 saying that it was, once in a lifetime, the sequel. So was it even necessary? Probably not. Del Rio was the world champion, and he was feuding with Jack Swagger, and they would have a match at WrestleMania 29. Del Rio took on Big Show. They were feuding.
I mean, this is when Ryback was at his peak. This is when Daniel Bryan was really starting to push on that ceiling. This is when Cesaro was becoming the person the fans wanted to see. I mean, is it not an option? I mean, these guys don't have to win. I mean, we know by this point that the Rumble winner doesn't have to win the Mania match, and they're not even necessarily they're not going to be in the main event slot. They're going to be earlier in the card anyway. Would it have been a better option to give it to one of those guys to help push them to the next level rather than, give it to a guy who we know he was going to be facing The Rock?
Or, Dave, do we have them face Alberto Del Rio at WrestleMania, and that is when Dolph Ziggler cashes his Money in the Bank in instead of the next night?
Absolutely. All sorts of options.
Yeah. Because they obviously had their plans on Dolph Ziggler cashing it in anyway, because he did it the next night on Raw. So you could have conceivably anybody win that Rumble if you're having them take on Alberto Del Rio, and then it's going to be the two of them, and then 2 year, you kind of pull the trigger 2 years earlier with from when Seth Rollins did it, and you have Cena and then Cena Rock just wrestle the second time, and Cena just wins, and then we don't have to deal with it anymore.
With the momentum that Ryback had at the tail end of the year before, at the tail end of 2012, Ryback would have been. I just see that Ryback would have been a real viable potential there. They had the whole Ryback Punk thing, and you got Punk morphing off elsewhere. Ryback winning that, and then, I'm going to challenge Alberto. I think it would have kept Ryback with some momentum that unfortunately he just completely lost when they decided they didn't have anything else for him to do.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And you could still do Dolph Ziggler cashing in his, whether it be that night, like you said, at Mania, you could have had a cash in there before the match ended, and it would have paid off.
So there's a lot of choices there in 2013 if you're deciding that Rock and Cena is not for the title, if you never have Rock win. But if Rock and Cena is not for the title, then we still have Punk as WWE champion. And his title reign is reaching unlimited levels, and I love that Punk reign because I love Punk. So,
and I think then you may have really got a Ryback win, and you get that rematch after the Shield had interfered.
Yep, I agree. All right, 2014, Pittsburgh. We all know what happened here. We all know what everyone wanted to happen here. However, I'm going to make a controversial call here, Dave. I'm perfectly fine with what happened in 2014 I think I'm fine with Batista winning. I'm fine with them doing the build with the yes movement and kind of putting Daniel Bryan in after the fact, because I don't want to lose that Daniel Bryan Triple H opener, which, next to Bret Owen is probably one of the greatest pay-per-view opening matches of all time.
Absolutely.
The reason I say that, Dave, is 1 year later, in 2015 in Philly, which I was at, instead of fucking around poor Roman Reigns, which was kind of heartbreaking. I felt bad for him because I thought he was going to get shanked. This is where I have Daniel Bryan win.
Yes.
In 2015, and then you hold off Seth Rollins because I don't think you want to do the moment, and you have a main event of David versus Goliath. Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar in the main event of WrestleMania 31 in Santa Clara. And I think that place will go batshit.
That would be outstanding. I mean, they had an amazing match when they wrestled at SummerSlam, and that would have been money. Brian was printing money for the company at this point, and for the life of me, to this day, I do not understand why they never got behind him when he had such the fan support. I mean, to me, it's second, third only behind Austin. Like, in my experience, I never saw. I mean, I get Hogan was Hogan, and Hogan was different, but post Hogan, Austin and Rock got that fan support and were driven, and I always felt Bryan was getting the same reactions as they were getting when on their rise, and they never really pulled the trigger. And even when they pulled the trigger, they never really pulled the trigger. And they try to rewrite their history in hindsight, but I mean, it was evident all the time. They never really got behind him. And I agree with you. Can you imagine him winning there and facing Brock at WrestleMania? I think they would have sold out. They would have had a lot of people tuning in, especially if you had that, it's the redemption story for Daniel Bryan. I had to forfeit the title because of injury. I'm back. I'm coming back, and I'm going for it again. And the reality is, we know he ended up having further injury issues. You could have had. I mean, imagine the heel heat that Brock gets by beating him. I mean, Bryan doesn't have to win that match because Brock is big enough to take the win, and people would go, we hate Brock, but he's just done it again. He just keeps doing it. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think that would have been an amazing moment.
In the moment, you were at the Batista one, weren't you? You were at the Batista win.
No, I was at the Roman win.
You're at the Roman win.
No, I was at the Roman win. Yep.
So let's take it back 12 months. Let's just go back there for a second, because I agree. Like, I don't think he should ever have been booked to win it. But with the way they laid out the story, you sort of, and what happened afterwards with Daniel Bryan, I, like you said, love it and love where it went. And I wouldn't put Daniel Bryan wasn't in the Rumble. So here's my question for you. In the moment, should they have considered switching the result? Because this was in 2012, this was when in 2014, this was when the Shield were at their peak. They'd hit this point where they were getting popular and they were about to be turned, but the crowd was sitting there. Like, in the moment, do you switch it and give Roman the win? Batista, no one wanted Batista to win. Do you switch it? Roman was getting, everyone was behind him in the moment. In the moment, do you consider switching it? I don't think the WrestleMania storyline for Roman would work, but in the moment, with the reaction that they got and the turn that happened from the crowd in the moment, if they'd given Roman the win, the crowd would have been happy.
Yes. That might have tempered the not having Daniel Bryan a little bit. That's true. And then you just have Ambrose and Rollins take on the New Age Outlaws, or whatever the fuck that match was. And then maybe you have Orton and Roman in the main event, and maybe still fit Daniel Bryan in there somewhere. Maybe do the same thing. I'm not sure.
I think that you still could have ended up with. I still think you could have ended up with the Daniel Bryan storyline. I just think that it would have been, and it could have been one-on-one. You could have brought him in. Roman could have been the you still do the triple threat, and Roman's the third man. You still bring Bryan into the picture. The storyline that we got was a great outcome for Daniel Bryan. I've always thought in the moment, if you'd switched it, you certainly wouldn't have had the crowd backlash. And I think Batista was impacted by the crowd backlash. I think that it impacted his outlook on wrestling and his desire to be around, and his desire to what he did in the ring. I always felt that he never seemed 100% into what he was doing after the Rumble. And I wonder if it was because of the reaction he got at the Rumble. He always seemed to be half-hearted in everything that happened after that. And, I feel for him. The crowd turned on him. He didn't deserve that. But,
right.
It's just a thought.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's a bad thought. It kind of changes the tone of WrestleMania 30 a little bit, but that's okay. However, if Batista gets pissed off and quits, then I don't get my Evolution reunion. So, and then I don't get to see Evolution live at Extreme Rules 2014. So I don't know if I want to give that up.
No.
But that's not a bad thought, having Roman win there instead. So 2015 we obviously have. 2016 obviously everybody probably hated because it led to a match nobody wanted at WrestleMania 32. Roman's the champion. I mean, what do we do there? Do we just keep that?
This to me was that they shouldn't have done. This was just, they shouldn't have had the belt on the line. They should have. I mean, it just from the beginning they mucked this one up, and it's a real shame because I think it could have been interesting. It could have been a good one. There's a couple of guys that could have been rehabbed through this. I mean, I always wonder. I mean, this to me, this is when you could have considered a Dean Ambrose if you didn't have the belt on the line, and the belt wasn't involved in the match. Dean Ambrose, I think, would have made a really good winner to go on to Mania and get a title shot out of this one. I think that would have been a fascinating outcome, especially if you keep the belt on Roman, and you've had Roman Seth, you've had Dean Seth, but you never really had Dean and Roman in a big time setting. And Dean Ambrose winning the Rumble and going on to face Roman Reigns would have been an interesting storyline.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been really great. This is totally out of my ass. So you can, even though he debuted that night, do you just pull the trigger and have AJ win the Rumble?
I would. I think, I know Vince wouldn't, and no. Vince wouldn't have done that. But in hindsight, I think we saw that AJ is the one person that seems to have defied everything that everyone thought would happen to him. Everyone thought that he would get booked into oblivion, that he'd never make it. And right. AJ goes on to have one of those amazing runs as a champion, main events, or is at least in that world title match scenario at a WrestleMania. So Vince got behind him. And in hindsight, AJ would have been the perfect person to have debut and go on to win. I think it would have been an amazing outcome. Just know that Vince would never have done it, but I agree with you. That would have made a hell of a storyline.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, you're right. Vince would never pull that shit off. Absolutely not. 2017, Randy Orton wins because he has to wrestle Bray Wyatt with LED cockroaches. So, so we have to have that. He last eliminates Roman, which I think is pretty funny. Roman was facing Taker. I think that was set in stone. You have the two belts. AJ Cena beats AJ, but then Cena loses it at the Chamber to Bray Wyatt. And I'm trying to think what the other world title match was.
The other world title match was
the match was
Kevin Owens.
That was the U.S. title. That was the U.S. title.
No, Kevin Owens faced Roman Reigns. That's for the Universal Championship. This was in the whole middle of the best friends storyline with Jericho.
Right. And then Roman fought Taker. Oh no, it was Goldberg and Brock. That's right, because Goldberg beat Owens in like 2 seconds that's what it was. Okay. Yeah. That's right. And then Brock beat Goldberg for the Universal title. Okay. Yeah. So that was happening whether we liked it or not.
You could have had Goldberg win the match. Oh, look, I don't think, it's I felt this is sort of the time period where the Rumble winner, this is to me is where the Rumble really sort of started to feel like it no longer held the prestige that it used to. It's in this time frame, these sort of couple of years where you get this whole, we get a Rumble winner, but this person wins the belt and then that person takes that and then the person's not really wrestling for the title anymore. And it really sort of, you get this journey from Rumble to Mania really starts to become a bit more convoluted as opposed to here's our winner and from the moment that Rumble wins, he's on his path to face the champion who was the champion at the Rumble. Like that traditional storyline seemed to get tossed and turned around a lot more now. I mean, Owens, like you said, Owens retains his title and then, Goldberg beats him next to no time and he's facing Brock, like you said, and Randy Orton
right.
and Bray Wyatt. It just, it sort of, you're in a time period now where it feels like, well, you give whoever ends up winning, there's no guarantee of anything anymore.
True. Yeah. So that's one that kind of, sticks out for me in terms of maybe switching things up a little bit, but
I would have been interested. I mean, if you want to switch it up, I would have been interested to let Goldberg win it, and then Goldberg does what we sort of had back when sort of when John Cena decided he was going to use his match at Elimination Chamber or No Way, like the following month rather than WrestleMania. I would have been more interested to see Goldberg win here and go, okay, I don't want to wait till Mania. I want Kevin Owens, sooner. And just play straight into that. And then you can just continue what you did.
Yeah. Yep. Now 2018 I was at, that was in Philly, and that was the first year of the men and women. And I had no problem with either of those. I would have definitely kept Asuka winning the women and Knock winning the men. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have had them both lose at WrestleMania. That's where I would have did the change. I would have definitely had Asuka.
Asuka definitely should have won. Yeah,
she should have won.
Yes.
Knock losing the Knock the Knock AJ thing. I mean, he could have gone either way with that. I mean, obviously
it's one of those ones. Their matches that was it's I don't know whatever happened there, because that maybe the expectations were too high. Maybe they had some restrictions put on them by backstage, by the producers, by the guys putting the matches together, because AJ and Knox should have tore the house down, and we know they both have the ability to do it. It's a shame that we didn't get the match that I think everyone was hoping for, and I really wish we did, because I feel Knock really. I feel that he got tainted, almost as if coming out of those matches with AJ, it was almost like, no, he didn't deliver, and we're done with him. And that's really, it sort of felt like he had his chance, and no, it's your fault, Knock, you didn't deliver, you didn't make it, and we're just going to send you back down the card. That's how I feel it really impacted him, I think.
Mm.
And I don't think he's recovered to date. I do not think his career has recovered.
Right. That's true. 2019, Seth Rollins wins the Men's Rumble. And, of course, he goes on to beat Brock at MetLife. And Becky, of course, had to win the Rumble. She was red hot.
Absolutely.
So she won the Rumble. And she goes on to win the winner-take-all match. So I have no problem with either of those.
No, totally agree.
Now we're getting into the last couple of years, which, it's kind of odd in its own way. But the 2020 Rumble was still full of people because it was pre-pandemic. Drew McIntyre won the Rumble, which I guess they were all into, and he ended up beating Brock in front of nobody, which was
look. I think
sad.
at the time he was the right choice. I think Drew was ready. It's a shame that his crowning moment came in front of an empty stadium or empty crowd, but I do think he was the right person, and I think it would have been interesting to see what sort of reaction he would have got if there had been a crowd.
Yeah, I agree too. I think his heart was. I felt bad for my man, my good friend, Callum McDougall, big Drew guy, because of course both Scottish, and it was a heartbreaker. It was a heartbreaker in that aspect to see what happened there. And then Charlotte, of course, won the women's one, and she went on to use it to face Rhea Ripley for the NXT title. And we all saw what happened there. In fact, I just watched that match because I have here in Studio B, I have one of the best of WWE playlists. It's actually the best of 2020. And one of the matches was Charlotte and Rhea from WrestleMania, and still busts me up that Rhea lost. And then, of course, we have oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, and that's the awkward one, because I think everyone would have liked to have seen, I think everyone was sort of like, well, does Charlotte really need to win? Was it necessary? I mean, she'd done everything. Did she really need a Rumble win under her belt?
Right.
Especially going on to NXT. I mean, if they're going to do it, if she was going to go into NXT, then why couldn't Shayna Baszler have just won instead? I mean, she was an NXT person, and why couldn't they have just done it that way instead?
Yeah, I agree. And then, of course, last year, Bianca won the women, and that had no problem with that. And then Edge, which people still wonder, although it didn't matter because he lost to Roman, because Roman was on fire at that point, and he still is. So,
Dave,
that was a lot of. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, and again, when you look at your list, who would you put in? I mean, did Edge need to win it? I don't think so. But again, you come back to where are you going to go? I think everything was such a mess last year. It really, I'm not sure anyone would have really benefited from winning last year. And I guess we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah. Of course, this year's Royal Rumble will be taking place a week from Saturday in St. Louis. Dave, this was one of the most deepest, this is probably through our first 4 episodes, the deepest dive through the looking glass that we've had. But it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of interesting things that I had not thought of with past Rumbles. I definitely wanted to get into 04 and 06, but we dived into a bunch of other ones that I didn't think we were going to. And I think that was pretty awesome. So thank you for that. It is always a pleasure. That'll do it for this month's episode of Through the Looking Glass. Dave Hall, you are the best. Awesome as always. Where can everyone find you?
Everyone can hit me up on Facebook. I'm Dave Hall on Facebook. You'll find me lurking the place to be, the various place to be nation pages, place to be chats, place to be. I'm all around. Send me a message. Connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. It's great fun. You'll find me lurking in the greatest WWE project. I lurk around there at times, and I think it's a good opportunity to plug with all our greatest winners, all our list of winners. It's probably a good chance to plug the project and encourage everyone to get on board and be a part of that. And so you can find me at all the places where the Place to Be Nation is going to be putting thoughts and ideas out. Yes,
thank you, Dave. He is talking, of course, about this year's 2022 PTB Stretch Project, which is the GWWE Greatest Wrestler Revisited. It has been 5 years since we all did the first one, and we have a ton of changes. I have some big changes on mine. So you have the whole year. Go back to you. If you're doing a brand new list, great. Please do it. If you are one that did one in 2017, take a look at it again. Is it the same? Is it different? Are there some that you left out? Are there some that are too low? I'll tell you, I have one was too low. I think I had in 2017, I think I had Roman Reigns like 72. So that's definitely changing now.
I'm going to throw out a question. I'm going to throw out a question for you to think about as we having just done this. These two people have come up a fair bit, but I think this would be an interesting thing. Who rates higher, Charlotte or Rick? Based on their WWE experiences only, who rates higher, father or daughter?
Fantastic question, Dave. I'm definitely going to have more. I'll tell you right now, I'm going to have more women on my list than I did 5 years ago. That's for sure. No doubt I'm going to have more women on my list, and some will be higher. So there's no doubt about that. A certain Kabuki warrior that spits green mist that I don't think made it on my list the first time will definitely make it on my list.
I don't remember the group Mutar ever being in WWE.
I wish. Great Muta would be on a bunch of other top 100s. You can follow me on Twitter at Scott C. Podfather. Please follow the brand on Twitter at PTBN Wrestling. We're going to do a lot of polls and promote a lot of stuff pertaining to not only our pods, but of course to the GWW project this year. We had a lot of great stuff dropping over the past week. Highway to the Impact Zone has come back. Of course, we had NWA Crock and Roll, the NWA Saturday Special, Place Be Podcast. Tomorrow, we'll be dropping a new episode of Place Be Nation's Main Event, myself, Nate, and Steve. PTBN's Pedestal, YouTube Roulette dropped last Saturday. All the great shows here on the PTB Wrestling Network, placetobe.podbean.com. Please check everything out. We are 1/4 of the great quadapods to go along with the PTB Pop Experience, the Jenny Position, and, of course, the No-So. So have a great rest of your January. Stay safe. If you do get COVID, battle through it like I did and many of us did, and you'll come out fine on the other side. Stronger, too. Dave and I will be back in February. Interesting topic there. I could hear Dave's wheels turning as we speak. What will February's topic be? Very interesting. Super Brawls, maybe? No. I love Super Brawl. But anyway, we'll think of something fun like we've done the first 4 episodes, and you'll really enjoy it. So, everybody, have a great rest of your January. Enjoy the current or this year's Royal Rumble. And thank you for joining us as we journeyed through the Looking Glass. Take care.